Sometimes the things we lose lead us to the things we're meant to find. In the gray industrial outskirts of Millbrook, Oregon, where January rain turns everything to rust and regret, Eleanor Sinclair stood shivering in a crowd of treasure hunters and bargain seekers. At 67, with arthritic hands and a heart still bleeding from the courtroom defeat that had stolen her granddaughter, she clutched the last $200 to her name. Her husband Lucas, once proud and strong, now hunched beside her like a man carrying the weight of every failure. The auctioneer's voice cut through the drizzle as he pointed to Unit 247, a tomb of forgotten belongings that nobody wanted. "Do I hear $50? Silence. 25? More silence. Lulo's trembling hand shot up when he called for $10. She'd been a librarian for 40 years, trained to see value where others saw nothing. But when the rusty door rolled open that afternoon, revealing boxes of children's drawings that depicted underground rooms and medical tables, Lulo felt her blood turn to ice. One drawing showed a little girl with pigtails who looked heartbreakingly familiar. Why would someone hide these drawings, and why did some of the medical files bear yesterday's dates? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you: the weight of silence. The drawing trembled in Lulo's weathered hands as Lucas fumbled for the flashlight app on his ancient phone. The pale blue light illuminated crayon strokes that seemed to pulse with desperate urgency. Stick figures of children lying on tables, men in white coats with faceless circles for heads, and in the corner, written in shaky block letters, "Help us." Jesus Christ, Lulo. Lucas's voice cracked like autumn leaves. He'd whispered those same words 6 months ago when the judge's gavel fell, when their son-in-law's team of lawyers had painted them as unfit guardians too old and too poor to care for 8-year-old Emma. What kind of sick? Lulo's librarian instincts kicked in, that familiar hunger for information overriding her revulsion. She set the drawing aside with the reverence she'd once reserved for rare manuscripts and reached for another box. Inside, manila folders burst with photocopied documents. Medical records with names blacked out, but dates that made her stomach lurch. December 15th, 2019, 3 weeks ago. January 3rd, 2020, 5 days ago. The storage unit smelled of mildew and something else, something sterile that reminded her of the hospital where they'd rushed Lucas after his heart attack last spring. That had been the beginning of their financial ruin. The medical bills that had forced them to mortgage the house they'd bought as newlyweds, the same house where Emma had taken her first steps in the living room. "Look at this." Lucas held up a hard drive, its black surface reflecting the gray afternoon light filtering through the facility's grimy windows. "And this one, another drive, then another. 7 in total, each carefully labeled with dates spanning 3 years. Lulo's hands moved with practiced efficiency, cataloging the contents like she was processing a new acquisition at the Riverside County Library, where she'd worked until the budget cuts forced her into early retirement. But this wasn't literature or local history. This was something that made her 40 years of reading crime novels seem quaint. A photograph slipped from between 2 folders and fluttered to the concrete floor. Lucas bent to retrieve it, then froze. Lulo. She turned, and the air left her lungs. The photograph showed a group of children standing in what looked like a hospital corridor, but the walls were concrete, windowless, industrial. The children wore matching gray pajamas and had numbers written on their wrists in black marker. In the back row, a girl with Emma's heart-shaped face and honey-colored hair stared directly at the camera with eyes that had seen too much. But it couldn't be Emma. The timestamp on the photo read March 2017. Emma would have been only 5, still living with their daughter Sarah, before the car accident that had made them guardians in the first place. "It's not her," Lulo whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. The resemblance was uncanny, down to the small scar above the left eyebrow from when Emma had fallen off her tricycle. Lucas pulled out his phone to call 911, but Lulo caught his wrist. Wait. Lulo, this is evidence of God knows what. Child abuse, human trafficking." "Evidence of what?" We don't know what this is. But even as she said it, she was thinking like the research librarian she'd been, cross-referencing the fragments of information before her. The medical records, the drawings, the photographs, they told a story, but she needed to understand the plot before she knew who to trust with it. They spent the next hour in careful silence, moving through the unit's contents like archaeologists at a dig site. More photographs, hundreds of them, computer disks, a journal written in a precise hand that documented subject responses to Protocol 7 and adjustment of dosage parameters for optimal compliance. The clinical language made her skin crawl. At the bottom of the last box, wrapped in a moldy towel, they found a cell phone. Dead, but newer than the other items. Lucas pocketed it without a word. Someone was collecting evidence, Lulo said, as they stood among the scattered contents, the magnitude of their discovery settling over them like the persistent Oregon drizzle. But why hide it here? Maybe they ran out of time. Lucas gestured to the facility around them. Storage places auction off units when people stop paying. Whoever rented this wanted someone to find it. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They wanted someone like us, someone desperate enough to bid on a unit nobody else wanted. The implications chilled her more than the January air. Someone had known this evidence would eventually surface, had counted on curious strangers to uncover what they couldn't safely reveal themselves. As they loaded the boxes into the back of their battered Honda Civic, Lulo couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The other auction-goers had long since departed with their prizes: vintage furniture, boxes of books, someone's abandoned exercise equipment, normal things from normal lives. What they had found was anything but normal. The ordinary world. The drive back to their apartment complex passed in tense silence, the Honda's worn windshield wipers struggling against the relentless Oregon drizzle. Lulo kept glancing in the side mirror, searching for signs they were being followed, but saw only the usual parade of rusted pickups and practical sedans that populated Millbrook's rain-slicked streets. Lucas gripped the steering wheel with the concentrated focus he'd developed since his heart attack, taking the turns slowly, protectively, as if their cargo of horrors might somehow sense rough handling. Sunset Manor Apartments squatted like a concrete afterthought behind a Chinese restaurant and a laundromat, its name a cruel joke considering the building's perpetual shadow and the industrial smokestacks that blocked any view of actual sunsets. They'd moved here after losing the house, after the legal fees had devoured 40 years of careful savings, after Emma had been taken to live with her stepfather in his pristine suburban development 3 hours south in Portland. "Help me get these upstairs before Mrs. Chen sees," Lula whispered as they parked in their assigned spot. The last thing they needed was their landlady's curiosity about why they were hauling mysterious boxes into an apartment they could barely afford. The rent was already 2 weeks late, and Mrs. Chen had been leaving increasingly pointed notes about prompt payment expectations. Their second-floor unit smelled of the industrial-strength disinfectant Lulo used to mask the lingering odors from the previous tenant. A combination of cigarettes, cat urine, and something medicinal she couldn't identify. The living room barely accommodated their salvaged furniture, the sagging couch from Emma's old bedroom, Lucas's recliner with the torn armrest, and Lulo's beloved bookshelf, now half empty since they'd sold most of her collection to pay for groceries. They set the boxes on the scratched dining table, a card table, really, purchased from Goodwill, and stood looking at their discovery like it might spontaneously combust. In the harsh fluorescent light of their kitchen, the contents seemed even more sinister. The children's drawings lay scattered across the laminate surface, their crayon cries for help surrounded by the detritus of their own diminished life, unpaid bills, generic brand medications for Lucas's heart condition, and a stack of greeting cards they couldn't afford to send to Emma. Lulo opened the refrigerator more from habit than hunger. A carton of milk 3 days past expiration, leftover rice from yesterday's dinner, and a single apple that had seen better days. They'd been living on rice, beans, and whatever was marked down in the grocery store's clearance section. Pride had kept them from applying for food stamps, though Lulo wondered daily if pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. "I should call Emma," Lucas said, settling into his recliner with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. This had become their evening routine, debating whether to make the call that might result in Richard's cold voice informing them that Emma was adjusting well and didn't need distractions from her former life. "She has homework," Lulo replied automatically, though they both knew it wasn't about homework. Richard had made it clear that their influence was detrimental to Emma's forward progress. The court had agreed, granting them supervised visitation twice a month at a sterile family services office where they sat on uncomfortable chairs and pretended everything was normal, while a social worker took notes. Their former life felt like something that had happened to other people. The comfortable house on Maple Street, where Lulo had maintained a garden and Lucas had built Emma a treehouse. The Sunday dinners where Emma would help Lulo make pancakes, while Lucas taught her card games he'd learned from his grandfather. The bedtime stories where Lulo would weave tales of brave librarians solving mysteries, always with happy endings. Now their evenings consisted of stretching one frozen dinner into two portions, watching whatever played on their ancient television, and pretending they weren't listening for the phone to ring with news about Emma. Good news or bad news, at this point, any contact felt like a victory. Lulo picked up one of the drawings again, studying the childish handwriting that spelled out "help us" in letters that seemed to echo Emma's own careful penmanship. Emma, who was now sleeping in a bedroom larger than their entire apartment, who attended a private school where she wore uniforms that cost more than their monthly food budget, who was probably forgetting the songs Lulo used to sing to her and the stories they'd created together. "What if this is real?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas looked up from his usual position of staring at the blank television screen. "What if what's real? These children. What if someone really is—" She couldn't finish the thought, couldn't voice the possibility that somewhere, children were suffering while she and Lucas worried about rent money and phone calls. Outside, the rain continued its endless percussion against their windows, and somewhere in Portland, Emma was living a life that no longer included them. Lucas shifted in his recliner, the torn armrest releasing another small puff of yellowed stuffing. "Real or not, what are we supposed to do about it? We can't even—" He gestured around their cramped apartment, at the overdue bills scattered across the coffee table, at their life reduced to hand-me-down furniture and expired milk. "We're nobody, Lulo. Just two old people who couldn't even convince a judge we were fit to raise our own granddaughter." The words hung in the air like the persistent dampness that seeped through their windows. Lulo set down the drawing and moved to the kitchen counter, where Lucas's heart medication sat next to a past-due notice from the electric company. 2 months ago, they'd been respected members of their community, she with her 4 decades at the library, he with his 30 years managing the county's road maintenance crew. Now they were invisible, the kind of people others looked through rather than at. The apartment's silence was broken by 3 sharp knocks on the door. Lulo and Lucas exchanged glances. It was nearly 8 p.m., and nobody visited them anymore. Their old friends had gradually faded away after the move to Millbrook, claiming the drive was too far, but really meaning that proximity to failure might be contagious. Mrs. Chen never knocked. She preferred leaving notes taped to doors like legal summons. Another series of knocks, more insistent. Lucas struggled out of his recliner, his hand instinctively moving to his chest, a gesture that had become habit since the heart attack. "I'll get it." Through the peephole, he saw a woman in her 30s, wearing a rain-soaked coat and an expression of barely controlled desperation. Her dark hair was plastered to her skull, and she kept glancing over her shoulder toward the parking lot. "Can I help you?" Lucas called through the door, his hand on the chain lock. "Please." The woman's voice carried the particular exhaustion of someone who had run out of options. "I saw you at the storage auction today. Unit 247. I need to know, did you find anything unusual?" Lulo appeared beside Lucas, her librarian's instincts immediately cataloging details. The woman's expensive but mud-stained shoes, the way she favored her left arm as if injured, the car keys clutched in her right hand like a weapon. Most importantly, the fear in her eyes that matched the terror Lulo had seen in those childhood drawings. "We don't know what you're talking about," Lucas said, but his voice carried no conviction. The woman pressed closer to the door. "My name is Dr. Amanda Chen. I worked at the Millbrook Research Institute until 3 years ago. That storage unit belonged to my colleague, Dr. Michael Torres. He disappeared in December 2017, and I've been trying to find what he hid ever since. Lulo felt the blood drain from her face. She thought of Mrs. Chen, their landlady, and wondered if the coincidence of names meant anything. In her experience, coincidences in small towns usually weren't. The police, Lucas said. If your colleague disappeared, the police can't help. Dr. Chen's laugh held no humor. Some of them are involved. The institute has contracts with the state, with federal agencies. Michael tried to go through proper channels first, tried to report what was happening to the children. That's when they started threatening him. The word children hit Lulo like a physical blow. She thought of the medical records, the photographs, that little girl who looked so much like Emma. What was happening to them? A long pause. Then, experimental treatments, psychological conditioning. Things that violate every medical ethics guideline ever written. Michael documented everything, but he couldn't get anyone to listen, so he gathered evidence, planned to take it to journalists, to child advocacy groups, to anyone who would expose the truth. But he never got the chance, Lulo said, understanding flooding through her. No. They found out about his investigation. He had maybe an hour to get the evidence somewhere safe before they came for him. I think he chose that storage facility because it was anonymous, forgettable. He probably figured eventually someone would buy the unit and discover what he'd hidden. Lucas opened the chain lock before Lulo could stop him. Dr. Chen stepped inside, bringing with her the smell of rain and something else, the sterile antiseptic scent that had clung to the storage unit's contents. You found it, didn't you? Dr. Chen's eyes moved to the dining table where the drawings lay scattered like accusations. Michael's evidence. Lulo found herself nodding. But we don't understand what it means. These children, these experiments. It means, Dr. Chen said, settling uninvited onto their second-hand couch, that you have the power to save lives, or to let more children disappear into that facility while everyone looks the other way. Outside, a car engine started in the parking lot. Dr. Chen's head snapped toward the window, her entire body tensing. They found me, she whispered. We need to move that evidence, now. Lulo looked at Lucas, at their ordinary life spread out around them like the remnants of a shipwreck. Then at the table covered with proof that somewhere, children were crying for help. The choice, she realized, had already been made. But as Dr. Chen reached for the nearest box of evidence, Lulo's hand shot out to stop her. The touch was electric, final. The moment when their careful anonymity would shatter forever. Wait. The word escaped Lulo's lips before she could stop it. Just wait. Dr. Chen's eyes widened with a desperation that made Lulo's chest tighten. We don't have time. If they traced me here, then one more minute won't matter. Lulo pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself like a shield. The apartment suddenly felt impossibly small, the walls pressing inward with the weight of what Dr. Chen was asking. You're talking about destroying our lives. Lucas moved to stand beside his wife. His breathing labored in the way that always preceded his worst episodes. Lulo's right. We need to think about this. Think about what? Dr. Chen's voice cracked. Children are dying while you think. The accusation hit its mark, but Lulo forced herself to remain still. 40 years as a librarian had taught her the difference between urgent and important, between crisis and catastrophe. This felt like both, and that terrified her more than she could articulate. You don't understand, Lulo said, gesturing around their shabby apartment. We have nothing left, nothing. We lost our house, our savings, our granddaughter. This place, these clothes, that broken-down car, it's all we have. If we get involved in something like this. She couldn't finish the sentence, but the implications hung heavy between them. Government conspiracies weren't solved by retired librarians and road crew supervisors. They were crushed by them, ground down until nothing remained but footnotes in newspaper articles nobody would remember. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her rain-soaked coat dripping onto their second-hand coffee table. I know what I'm asking. I lost everything too. My career, my reputation, my marriage, everything. But those children. What about our granddaughter? Lucas's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of their entire broken world. What happens to Emma if we disappear? What happens to our visitation rights if we're arrested, or worse? The question exposed the raw nerve at the center of Lulo's terror. Emma was already being raised by a man who viewed them as contamination from a lower social class. Richard had made it clear that their influence was unwelcome, their love and inconvenience to be managed through court orders and supervised visits. If they became fugitives or conspiracy theorists, or whatever people who exposed government secrets became, what little connection they had to Emma would vanish forever. "She's all we have left," Lulo said, her voice breaking. "The only family we have left in this world." Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly, but her urgency remained. "And what kind of world are you leaving her? One where children disappear and nobody asks questions because it's too dangerous to care?" Lulo flinched. It was the same argument she'd been having with herself since they'd first opened those boxes, the same moral arithmetic that had kept her awake the previous night. How many children's lives weighed against one granddaughter's future? How many strangers' suffering justified risking the only love they had left? "You think we haven't thought about that?" Lucas moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the parking lot below. "But look at us. Really look. We're 67 years old. I had a heart attack last year and can barely climb a flight of stairs. Lulo hasn't worked since the library laid her off. We're living in a 2-room apartment above a Chinese restaurant, eating expired food and wearing clothes from Goodwill." His words painted their diminished reality in stark relief. They weren't heroes from the mystery novels Lulo loved to read. They were casualties of an economic system that discarded people the moment they became inconvenient. What could they possibly do against an organization powerful enough to make doctors disappear? "We're not equipped for this," Lulo added, though the excuse tasted like ash in her mouth. "We don't have resources or connections or influence. We can't even afford a lawyer if something goes wrong." Dr. Chen stood abruptly, her movements sharp with barely controlled frustration. "You think Michael Torres was equipped? You think I am? Nobody's equipped for this. That's exactly why it keeps happening." Outside, another car door slammed. Dr. Chen's head snapped toward the sound, her entire body coiled like a spring. The fear radiating from her was infectious, seeping into the apartment's stale air until Lulo felt it settling in her lungs. "5 minutes," Dr. Chen whispered, checking her phone with trembling fingers. "That's all I'm asking. Help me move this evidence somewhere safe. Then you can pretend you never saw it. You can go back to your quiet life and forget any of this happened." But Lulo knew that forgetting was already impossible. Those children's drawings were burned into her memory, their crayon pleas echoing in every quiet moment. The choice Dr. Chen offered, help or abandon, felt like choosing between drowning and burning. She looked at Lucas, at the medication bottles that kept him alive, at the overdue bills that defined their existence. Then, at the evidence scattered across their table like accusations they weren't brave enough to answer. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled only by the sound of Lucas's labored breathing and the rain drumming against their windows. Lulo stared at the evidence spread across their table, those desperate children's drawings, the medical records with their clinical descriptions of horror, the photographs that would haunt her dreams forever. Then she thought of Emma. Emma, at 5 years old, sobbing in Lulo's arms after a nightmare, whispering, "Grandma Lu, will you keep the monsters away?" Emma, at 7, carefully drawing pictures of their family with crayon figures holding hands under a smiling sun. Emma, at 9, the last time they'd held her, clinging to Lulo's neck and begging not to go live with Daddy, Richard, because he doesn't tell stories like you do. What kind of grandmother would she be if she could keep some monsters away but not others? "Lucas," she said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Remember what you told Emma when she was afraid of the dark?" His eyes met hers, understanding dawning slowly. That brave people aren't the ones who aren't scared. They're the ones who do the right thing even when they are scared. And what did I always tell her about stories? That the best ones are where ordinary people become heroes because someone needs saving. Lucas's voice cracked. "But Lulo, this isn't one of Emma's bedtime stories, isn't it?" She picked up one of the drawings, a little girl with brown pigtails reaching through what looked like prison bars. Look at her. Really look. She could be Emma. She could be any of our children, any of our grandchildren. Dr. Chen's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and went pale. They're asking about residents in this building. We have maybe 2 minutes before they start knocking on doors. Lulo felt something shift inside her chest, like tectonic plates grinding against each other before an earthquake. 40 years of helping people find information, of believing that knowledge was power and truth mattered. It had all led to this moment. Not the comfortable mysteries of overdue books and misfiled catalogs, but real mystery, real danger, real children who needed someone to believe their crayon cries for help. What do you need us to do? The words escaped before her rational mind could stop them. Lucas turned from the window, his face cycling through surprise, fear, and something that might have been pride. Lulo. No. She stood, feeling decades of invisible weight lifting from her shoulders. We've spent 2 years being powerless. Powerless to keep our house, powerless to keep Emma, powerless to do anything but survive. But this, she gestured to the evidence, this is something we can actually do something about. Dr. Chen was already moving, scooping documents into boxes with practiced efficiency. There's a place we can take this. A journalist in Portland who's been investigating missing children cases. But it has to be tonight, and once we do this, there's no going back. They'll know you're involved. We're already involved, Lucas said quietly. He moved to help, his hands shaking as he gathered the photographs. The moment we opened that storage unit, we became involved. Lulo felt the last of her hesitation crumble. They'd lost everything that mattered, trying to fight Richard's lawyers through proper channels, following rules that only protected people wealthy enough to buy justice. Maybe it was time to try a different approach. What about Emma? She asked, the question that had been clawing at her heart. Dr. Chen paused in her packing. What about all the other Emmas? The ones in those pictures? The ones who might be next? You can protect Emma by making sure this never happens to her. Outside, footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Heavy, official footsteps that made Lulo's pulse spike. Back exit, Lucas said, his old road crew instincts kicking in, through the kitchen. Fire escape leads to the alley. They moved with surprising coordination, 3 people who had nothing left to lose, except their silence. Dr. Chen hefted the largest box while Lulo grabbed her purse and the folder of medical records. Lucas, despite his weak heart, took the box of photographs and hard drives. As they reached the kitchen window, a sharp knock echoed from their front door. Portland Police. We're looking for Dr. Amanda Chen. The sound galvanized them. Lucas wrestled the window open while Dr. Chen climbed onto the fire escape, her box clutched against her chest. The rain hit them immediately, cold and sharp as needles. Mrs. Sinclair, Dr. Chen whispered as Lulo passed her box through the window. Are you sure about this? Lulo looked back at their apartment, at Lucas's medication bottles on the counter, at the overdue bills scattered on their table, at the life of quiet desperation they'd been trying so hard to preserve. Then she thought of Emma, and of all the children whose drawings lay hidden in those boxes. I've never been more sure of anything, she said, and stepped out into the storm. The fire escape's metal grating was slick with rain and years of rust, each step threatening to send them plummeting into the alley below. Lucas moved carefully, his breathing already labored from the exertion, while Dr. Chen balanced her box with the practiced ease of someone who'd made similar escapes before. Lulo came last, her librarian's sensible shoes finding purchase on each rung as police voices echoed from their abandoned apartment. There, Dr. Chen whispered, pointing to a battered Honda Civic parked behind the dumpster. That's mine. They reached the ground as flashlight beams began sweeping the windows above. The alley reeked of rotting vegetables and old grease from the restaurant's kitchen, but Lulo had never been more grateful for the cover of garbage and shadows. They loaded the boxes into Dr. Chen's trunk with silent urgency, their movements synchronized by desperation. Where exactly are we going? Lucas asked as they climbed into the car, his voice tight with pain. Portland, a warehouse district near the river. Dr. Chen started the engine, keeping the headlights off as she backed toward the street. There's someone there who's been waiting 3 years for this evidence. As they pulled onto Main Street, Lulo saw police cars surrounding their building, their red and blue lights painting the rain-soaked pavement in violent colors. She watched their former life disappear in the side mirror, feeling oddly liberated despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Dr. Chen," she said, finally voicing the question that had been nagging at her. "Our landlady, Mrs. Chen. Are you related?" A bitter smile crossed the younger woman's face. "My mother. She doesn't know I'm involved in this, and she can't know. It would put her in danger, too." The revelation hit Lulo like a physical blow. Mrs. Chen, with her careful distance and formal notes, had been protecting her daughter all along. The older woman's apparent coldness suddenly made sense. She'd been trying to keep her tenants safe by keeping them at arm's length. They drove in tense silence through Millbrook's empty streets, past the closed shops and shuttered houses that defined their small industrial town. The research institute loomed in the distance, its windows dark except for a few scattered lights that somehow seemed more ominous than complete darkness would have been. "How many children?" Lulo asked suddenly. "How many were there?" Dr. Chen's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "In the files you found? Probably 40 or 50 over the past 5 years. But Michael suspected there were others from before he started documenting. Maybe hundreds." The number was staggering. Hundreds of children disappeared into a system designed to erase their existence. Lulo thought of the careful bureaucracy of her library career, how thoroughly paperwork could make inconvenient truths disappear. If someone applied that same methodical efficiency to hiding crimes, their families? Lucas asked. Foster children mostly. Runaways. Kids the system had already failed. That's what made it so perfect. Nobody important was looking for them, and the few people who cared didn't have the resources to investigate properly. As they reached the highway, Dr. Chen finally turned on the headlights. The road stretched ahead into darkness, leading them away from everything familiar toward a truth that powerful people had killed to protect. Lulo felt the weight of their decision settling over her like a heavy coat, warm but burdensome. "This journalist," she said. "Can we trust her?" "Sarah Martinez. She's been investigating institutional abuse cases for 15 years. Lost her job at the Oregonian for refusing to drop a story about state-run facilities. Now she works independently, funded by child advocacy groups." Dr. Chen checked her rearview mirror constantly, watching for pursuit. If anyone can get this evidence to the right people, it's her. The rain intensified as they drove, turning the highway into a river of reflected lights and dangerous curves. Lucas sat quietly in the back seat, one hand pressed to his chest, his medication bottles rattling softly in his jacket pocket. Lulo reached back to squeeze his knee, feeling the tremor in his leg that always preceded his worst episodes. "Pull over," she said suddenly. "Lucas needs his pills." Dr. Chen found a rest stop, its single fluorescent light flickering over empty picnic tables. As Lucas took his medication, Lulo studied the younger woman's profile. She was beautiful in a haunted way, with the kind of determined exhaustion that came from fighting losing battles for too long. "Why didn't you take the evidence yourself?" Lulo asked. "When you first found the storage unit?" "I tried. But I'm already marked, already being watched. The moment I surfaced with Michael's documentation, they'd have discredited me, or worse." "But you two," she turned to face them. "Nobody expects a retired librarian and road worker to expose government conspiracies. You're invisible in the best possible way." The irony wasn't lost on Lulo. The same invisibility that had made them vulnerable to Richard's lawyers might now be their greatest asset. They'd learned the rules of this new world. Power protected power, but sometimes the powerless could slip through cracks that important people couldn't see. Lucas swallowed his pills with shaking hands, the fluorescent light above casting harsh shadows across his weathered face. Lulo watched him carefully, noting the slight blue tinge around his lips that always appeared when his heart struggled. They couldn't afford a medical emergency now, but they also couldn't afford to turn back. "I'm okay," he said, reading her expression. "Just need a minute." Dr. Chen paced near the car, her phone casting an eerie glow as she checked for messages. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the highway, cataloging each passing headlight as potential threat or innocent traveler. Her paranoia was infectious, seeping into Lulo's consciousness until even the wind through the trees sounded like approaching footsteps. Amanda. Lulo used her first name deliberately, trying to bridge the gap between stranger and ally. What happens after we deliver this evidence? What happens to us? The younger woman stopped pacing. I don't know. I wish I could promise you'll be safe, that you can go back to your normal lives, but she gestured helplessly. Michael Torres was careful too. He had backup plans, safe houses, encrypted communications. None of it mattered in the end. The admission hung between them like a death sentence. Lulo felt the last vestiges of her old life, the quiet retirement they'd planned, the simple routine of visits with Emma, the invisible safety of poverty, dissolving in the rain-soaked darkness. We can still go back, Lucas said quietly. Right now. We could say we never saw you, never opened those boxes. We could... No. Lulo's voice surprised her with its firmness. We couldn't live with ourselves. Every time I looked at Emma, I'd remember those other children. Every bedtime story, every hug, every promise to keep her safe. It would all be poisoned by what we chose not to do. Lucas studied her face in the flickering light, searching for cracks in her resolve. After 43 years of marriage, he could read her moods like weather patterns, but tonight she felt different to herself. Harder, more focused, as if discovering those children's pleas for help had awakened something that had been sleeping too long. The journalist, she continued, turning back to Dr. Chen. Sarah Martinez. What makes you think she'll actually publish this? It's not exactly a safe story. Because she's already investigating. 3 months ago, she contacted me through encrypted channels, said she'd been tracking unusual mortality rates at state facilities. She knows something's wrong but can't prove it. Michael's documentation, what you found, it's the missing piece. Dr. Chen pulled out a second phone, older and more battered than the first. This is how we communicate with her, completely isolated from any networks they might be monitoring. She's expecting us, but we have to be there before dawn. After that, she disappears until the story breaks. The timeline felt impossibly compressed. Hours ago, Lulo's biggest concern had been whether they could afford heat for another month. Now they were racing against sunrise to expose government crimes, their entire future balanced on the reliability of a journalist they'd never met. What about Emma? The question escaped before she could stop it. When this story breaks, Richard will use it against us. He'll say we're conspiracy theorists, unfit grandparents. We'll never see her again. The possibility gutted her. Richard already viewed their working-class background as contamination. How would he react when they became fugitives from a government conspiracy? Emma would grow up believing her grandparents were crazy, dangerous people who'd chosen strangers over family. Maybe, Dr. Chen said gently. Or maybe she'll grow up proud that her grandparents were brave enough to save other children when it mattered most. Maybe she'll understand that some things are more important than safety. Lucas stood slowly, his color returning to normal. She'll understand because we'll tell her. Someday, when she's old enough, we'll explain why we made this choice, and if she's half the person we raised her mother to be, she'll be proud. His words carried the weight of finality. They were past the point of retreat now, committed to a path that would either vindicate their choice or destroy what remained of their family. Lulo felt the terrible freedom of having nothing left to lose except their integrity. We should go, Dr. Chen said, checking her phone again. Sarah will only wait until 6 a.m. After that, she assumes we've been compromised. They climbed back into the car, the boxes of evidence shifting in the trunk like sleeping accusations. As Dr. Chen pulled back onto the highway, Lulo watched the rest stop disappear in the darkness, taking with it the last moment they could have chosen differently. The road ahead stretched toward Portland, toward a reckoning 3 years in the making. Somewhere in the city, a journalist waited with the power to transform their discovery into justice, and somewhere behind them, forces were mobilizing to ensure that transformation never occurred. Lulo reached for Lucas's hand, finding it steady despite everything. They drove toward dawn and whatever consequences it would bring. The highway stretched through the Oregon darkness like a black river, carrying them deeper into territory, from which there might be no return. Lulo watched the clock on Dr. Chen's dashboard tick toward 4:30 a.m., each minute bringing them closer to their rendezvous with Sarah Martinez, and further from any chance of pretending this night had never happened. Lucas had fallen into an uneasy sleep in the back seat, his breathing shallow but steady. The medication was helping, but Lulo could see the strain this ordeal was placing on his weakened heart. At 69, he should have been worrying about garden maintenance and prescription costs, not fleeing through the night with evidence that could topple government officials. "There," Dr. Chen said, pointing toward Portland's industrial skyline emerging from the pre-dawn gloom. 20 more minutes. The city looked different at this hour, skeletal and vulnerable, its usual bustle reduced to scattered lights and empty streets. Lulo had always found Portland intimidating during their rare visits, but now it felt like sanctuary, a place large enough to hide them until the truth found its voice. Her phone buzzed. Richard's name appeared on the screen, and her blood turned to ice water. "Who is it?" Dr. Chen asked, noting her reaction. "My son-in-law." Lulo stared at the device as if it might explode. "He never calls this early, never calls at all unless—" The phone went silent, then immediately began ringing again. Richard's persistence sent panic clawing up her throat. There was only one reason he would be calling at 4:30 in the morning. "Answer it," Dr. Chen said grimly. "But put it on speaker." Lulo's finger trembled as she accepted the call. Richard's voice filled the car, smooth and controlled despite the hour. "Eleanor, I apologize for the early call, but I'm concerned about Emma." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What about Emma? What's wrong?" "She's fine, for now. But I've received some troubling information about your recent activities. Something about police visiting your apartment? I'm worried about the kind of environment you're providing for her visits." Lulo felt the trap closing around them. Somehow, he already knew. The police investigation, their flight, all of it had reached him through channels she couldn't begin to understand. But the real message was clear. They had something he wanted to protect, and Emma was his leverage. "I don't know what you mean," she managed. "Of course you don't." Richard's tone carried the condescending patience he used on everyone he considered beneath him. "Which is why I think it's best if Emma stays with us for the immediate future, until this situation resolves itself." "What situation?" Lucas had awakened, his voice sharp with alarm. "Lucas. Good. You should both hear this. I'm concerned that you may have become involved with some very dangerous people. People who don't have Emma's best interests at heart." Dr. Chen was shaking her head frantically, drawing her finger across her throat. But Lulo barely saw her. All she could think about was Emma, probably asleep in her pink bedroom, unaware that she was being used as a weapon against the only grandparents she had left. "You can't keep her from us," Lucas said. The custody agreement allows me to suspend visitation if I believe the child is at risk. And given your apparent involvement with fugitives from federal investigation, I'd say that threshold has been met." The casual mention of federal involvement confirmed Lulo's worst fears. This wasn't just about local police anymore. Forces with real power had taken notice of their activities, and those forces had ways of communicating with people like Richard. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I want my daughter to be safe. I want her grandparents to make sensible decisions about their remaining years. And I want everyone to remember that some fights can't be won by good intentions alone." Dr. Chen was pulling into a warehouse district, the car's headlights sweeping across chain-link fences and loading docks. In the distance, the Willamette River reflected the city's lights like scattered coins. They were almost there, almost at the point where they could hand over their terrible knowledge and transform it into something larger than themselves. But Emma's face filled Lulo's mind, bright eyes and gap-toothed smile. The way she insisted on hearing the same fairy tales over and over, her absolute faith that her grandparents could protect her from any monster that might threaten her world. "I need time to think," Lulo said. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Emma will be perfectly safe with us while you decide what kind of legacy you want to leave her." The call ended, leaving them in silence broken only by the sound of tires on wet pavement and Lucas's ragged breathing. Dr. Chen parked behind a loading dock but made no move to get out. "This is what they do," she said quietly. "They find what matters most to you, and they make it conditional on your silence." Lulo stared at her phone's blank screen, seeing Emma's future reflected in its darkness. Everything they'd built together, every bond of love and trust, now hung in the balance against the lives of children they'd never met. The ordeal had truly begun. The warehouse district felt like a graveyard at 4:45 a.m., its loading docks and chain-link fences casting skeletal shadows in the pre-dawn gloom. Dr. Chen's hands remained frozen on the steering wheel, her knuckles white against the black leather. None of them moved to get out of the car. "He has her," Lulo whispered, the words falling into the silence like stones into deep water. "Richard has Emma, and he knows exactly what we're doing." Lucas leaned forward from the back seat, his breath still labored from the shock of the phone call. "How is that possible? How could he know we're here?" Dr. Chen's laugh held no humor. "Because they've been watching us from the beginning. Every move we made, every choice we thought was ours, they were 3 steps ahead." She finally released the steering wheel, flexing her fingers as if trying to restore circulation. "I should have realized. The storage unit auction, my mother's building, even Michael's evidence. It was all too convenient." The implication hit Lulo like a physical blow. "You think they wanted us to find it?" "I think they've been looking for a way to neutralize Michael's documentation for 3 years. What better method than to let desperate, powerless people discover it, then use their own granddaughter to ensure their silence?" Lulo felt the careful architecture of her courage collapsing. Every decision that had seemed brave now revealed itself as manipulation. They weren't heroes exposing truth. They were pawns being moved across a board by players they couldn't even see. "The journalist," Lucas said suddenly. "Sarah Martinez. She's still waiting for us." Dr. Chen checked her phone. "For another hour. But what's the point? The moment we hand over this evidence, Emma disappears completely. Richard has legal custody, unlimited resources, and federal backing. We'd never see her again." Lulo closed her eyes, trying to summon the righteous anger that had carried her this far. She thought of the children's drawings, their desperate pleas for help scrawled in crayon and pencil. Dozens of faces stared back at her from memory, each one a Emma who had been failed by adults who chose safety over justice. But those children were abstractions now, shadows on paper. Emma was real. Emma was 8 years old and probably dreaming about Saturday morning cartoons, unaware that her grandparents were about to choose between her future and the ghosts of strangers. "There has to be another way," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to herself. "There isn't." Dr. Chen's voice carried the weight of someone who had learned this lesson before. Michael Torres thought there was another way. He documented everything, built an airtight case, recruited allies in law enforcement and journalism. They found him floating in the Columbia River 3 years ago. Suicide, according to the official report. The warehouse district stretched around them, empty and industrial, the kind of place where inconvenient conversations could happen without witnesses. Lulo realized they were completely isolated, dependent on a woman whose mother they'd trusted, whose story they'd accepted without question. "Why should we believe you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "How do we know you're not part of this? How do we know this whole thing isn't designed to neutralize us?" Dr. Chen turned to face her, and in the dashboard's green glow, her expression looked almost relieved. "Because if I was working for them, Emma would already be gone. Permanently. They don't need elaborate schemes to silence people like us. They just need leverage and patience." Lucas was checking his phone, scrolling through missed calls and text messages. "There's something from Mrs. Patterson, Emma's teacher." His voice cracked as he read. "She says Emma didn't come to school yesterday. Richard called in sick for her, but Mrs. Patterson saw them loading suitcases into his car." The news hit Lulo like a sledgehammer. Emma wasn't just being used as leverage. She was already gone, spirited away to some location where geography would reinforce Richard's legal advantages. By the time this night ended, their granddaughter might be in another state, another world entirely. "This is what losing looks like," Dr. Chen said quietly. "This is how they win. not with dramatic confrontations or obvious threats, but with bureaucracy and legal procedures and the simple application of power against people who have none. Lulo stared at the warehouse where Sarah Martinez waited with the ability to transform their evidence into headlines. Inside her purse, the encryption keys and photographs seemed to pulse with their own weight, 40 children's lives reduced to digital files that no one would ever see. The rain began again, droplets striking the windshield like tears. Somewhere in the distance, Portland's morning shift was beginning, ordinary people starting ordinary days, unaware that justice had just died quietly in a warehouse parking lot. "We have to go back," Lulo said finally. "We have to call Richard and tell him we're coming home. Tell him we'll keep quiet." The words tasted like ashes, but Emma's safety demanded them. Their granddaughter's future mattered more than their conscience. They had lost everything that counted. Lucas's phone rang again. This time it wasn't Richard's name on the screen. It was Emma herself, calling from her tablet. Lulo's heart hammered as she grabbed the device, her finger hovering over the answer button. "Don't," Dr. Chen warned. "They could be using her to—" "I don't care." Lulo accepted the call, and Emma's face appeared through tears and pixelated connection issues. "Grandma Lu?" Emma's voice was small, frightened. "Daddy Richard says we're going on a trip, but I don't want to go. I want to come see you and Grandpa Lucas." Behind Emma, Lulo could see the sterile perfection of Richard's house. White walls, expensive furniture, everything cold and pristine. But something was wrong with the image. The angle was off, like Emma was hiding with the tablet. "Where are you going, sweetheart?" Lulo kept her voice gentle despite the panic clawing at her chest. "I don't know. Somewhere far away. He packed all my clothes and said I wouldn't be coming back for a long time." "Grandma, I'm scared." Lucas leaned into the frame. "We're coming to get you, Emma, right now." "You can't." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "There are men here. They have guns. Daddy Richard says they're protecting us, but they won't let me leave my room." The revelation hit Lulo like lightning. This wasn't just custody manipulation. This was imprisonment. Richard wasn't protecting Emma. He was using her as a hostage while federal agents secured his house. The careful legal fiction had collapsed into something much darker. "Emma, listen to me very carefully," Lulo said. "Do you remember the story I told you about the princess who saved herself?" Emma nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "You're that princess now. I need you to be very brave and very smart. Can you do that for Grandma?" "I think so." Dr. Chen was staring at the phone screen, her expression shifting from resignation to something else entirely. "Lulo, what are you doing?" But Lulo had seen something in Emma's background that changed everything, a small detail that revealed the truth Richard had been hiding. On the wall behind Emma, barely visible through the tablet's camera, was a certificate. Not one of Richard's law degrees or professional accolades, but something else entirely. A Department of Health and Human Services commendation for excellence in child placement services. The pieces fell together with sickening clarity. Richard wasn't just Emma's stepfather. He was part of the system, his law practice, his connections, his sudden appearance in their daughter's life after she'd moved to Portland. It had all been orchestrated. "Emma," Lulo said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest, "I need you to look at the window. Can you see outside?" "Yes." "There's a big black car in the driveway, and another one across the street." "Good. Now listen. Do you remember Grandpa's story about the secret agent who used mirrors to send messages?" Emma's face brightened slightly. "Like with the bathroom mirror and the flashlight?" "Exactly. I need you to find something that can make light, maybe the lamp by your bed. Can you do that?" Lucas understood immediately. He was already pulling out his phone, dialing 911. Dr. Chen grabbed his wrist. "You can't call the police. They're compromised." "Not the police," Lucas said grimly. "The media." He scrolled through his contacts until he found what he was looking for. The number for Portland's Channel 7 news tip line. Lulo had never been prouder of her husband's methodical nature. While she'd been consumed with despair, he'd been thinking 3 moves ahead. "Emma," Lulo continued, "I want you to point that light toward the street. Turn it on and off, like we're sending a secret message. What's the message? Lulo met Dr. Chen's eyes in the dashboard light, seeing her own realization reflected there. They had been thinking about this all wrong. The evidence wasn't just documentation of crimes, it was proof of Richard's involvement. Emma wasn't collateral damage. She was the next victim. The message is help, Lulo said. But Emma, there's something else I need you to understand. The trip Daddy Richard wants to take, you can't go. No matter what he says, no matter what anyone tells you, you cannot leave that house. But the men with guns are there to make sure you disappear forever, Lulo said, the words tasting like poison, just like the other children. Dr. Chen was already starting the car. We're going back. We're going to get her. With what? We don't have weapons. We don't have backup. We have the truth, Dr. Chen said fiercely. And we have something they never expected. What? Grandparents who won't abandon their child. The warehouse district fell away behind them as they raced back toward the highway. On the phone screen, Emma was frantically flashing her lamp toward the street, sending her desperate signal into the pre-dawn darkness. Everything had shifted. The game had revealed its true stakes. The highway stretched before them like a lifeline, wet asphalt gleaming under the scattered streetlights as Dr. Chen pushed her Honda beyond any reasonable speed limit. In the passenger seat, Lulo kept her eyes fixed on the phone screen where Emma continued her desperate signaling, the lamp's beam cutting through the pre-dawn darkness of Richard's neighborhood like a lighthouse beacon. Channel 7 is sending a crew, Lucas reported from the back seat, his phone pressed to his ear. 20 minutes, maybe less. I told them we have evidence of federal agents holding a child against her will. That's not enough time, Dr. Chen muttered, taking the interstate ramp without slowing down. If Richard sees news vans, he'll move her immediately. But Lulo felt something shifting inside her chest, not the crushing weight of defeat that had paralyzed her in the warehouse parking lot, but something harder, more focused. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into fuel rather than poison. Richard's mistake had been revealing the scope of his deception. In trying to demonstrate his power, he'd shown her exactly what they were fighting. Emma, sweetheart, she said into the phone, I need you to do something else for me. Can you see the men with guns from your window? Emma adjusted the tablet's angle, and Lulo caught a glimpse of two figures in dark clothing stationed by the front entrance. Federal agents, just as Richard had implied, but their positioning told a different story. They weren't protecting the house, they were containing it. How many do you see? 2 by the front door. Maybe more by the garage? It's hard to tell. Dr. Chen was weaving between the sparse early morning traffic, her medical training evident in the precise way she calculated risks and distances. Professional surveillance teams work in 4s, she said. Front, back, and 2 mobile units. If they're preparing to transport her, they'll have additional vehicles staged nearby. Lucas had moved on to another call, his voice gaining strength with each conversation. Mrs. Patterson, this is Lucas Sinclair, Emma's grandfather. I need you to listen very carefully. Emma is in immediate danger. Lulo felt a surge of pride watching her husband work. The quiet librarian who'd seemed so defeated just hours ago had found his voice, methodically building a network of witnesses and allies. He'd always been the better strategist between them, thinking in systems and connections while she focused on individual details. The teacher's calling the school district, Lucas reported. She'll have them contact Child Protective Services directly, bypass any local channels that might be compromised. On screen, Emma had moved to a different window, giving them a clearer view of the street. The black sedans Lucas had mentioned were obvious now, their government plates visible even through the tablet's camera. But Lulo noticed something else, house lights beginning to flicker on in neighboring windows. Emma's signaling had attracted attention. Good girl, Lulo whispered. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Dr. Chen's phone rang through the car's speakers. The caller ID showed only a number, but she answered anyway. Dr. Chen? This is Sarah Martinez. I'm at the warehouse and you're not here. What's happening? The journalist's voice carried the sharp edge of someone accustomed to broken promises and missed opportunities. But Dr. Chen's response surprised Lulo with its decisiveness. Change of plans. We're not coming to you, you're coming to us. How quickly can you get to Hillsdale? Depends on what story you're promising me. Federal agents holding an 8-year-old girl hostage to prevent exposure of a child trafficking conspiracy that reaches into state government. The line went silent for several seconds. Then, text me the address. I'm leaving now. Lulo felt the pieces of their counterattack falling into place with gathering momentum. Channel 7 News, Emma's teacher, Child Protective Services, and now an investigative journalist with 3 years of preparation. Richard might have federal backing, but he was still vulnerable to the one thing government agencies feared most: public scrutiny. There's something else, she said, studying Emma's face on screen. Emma, do you remember the fairy tale about Hansel and Gretel, how they left breadcrumbs to find their way home? Emma nodded, though her confusion was obvious. I need you to leave breadcrumbs for us. Can you find a way to mark which room you're in? Maybe put something bright in the window, something we could see from outside? Understanding dawned in Emma's expression. She disappeared from view for a moment, then returned holding her favorite stuffed animal, a purple elephant that Lulo had given her for Christmas. Mr. Peanuts, Lulo said, her voice thick with emotion. Perfect. Emma positioned the elephant in her window, its bright purple visible even through the phone's camera, a beacon of innocence marking their target, their mission, their reason for risking everything. Dr. Chen was already taking the Hillsdale exit, and ahead of them, the eastern horizon showed the first pale hints of dawn. In 6 hours, they'd lost their home, their safety, and their illusions about the world's fairness. But they'd gained something more valuable: absolute clarity about what mattered most. We're coming, Emma, Lulo said. Whatever happens, we're coming. The first news van arrived as they turned onto Richard Street, its white bulk contrasting sharply against the pre-dawn gloom. Through Emma's tablet, Lulo watched federal agents scramble into defensive positions, their careful surveillance operations suddenly exposed under the harsh glare of media attention. They're panicking, Dr. Chen observed, parking 3 houses down with a clear view of the chaos unfolding. Look at their body language. This wasn't in their playbook. Lucas was coordinating with Sarah Martinez, who had arrived simultaneously from the opposite direction in a battered Honda Civic that screamed investigative journalist. The pieces of their desperate gambit were converging with military precision, each element arriving exactly when needed. But Lulo felt no satisfaction in their tactical success. On the tablet screen, Emma's face showed the strain of maintaining her brave facade while adult voices argued somewhere beyond the camera's range. Her granddaughter was still trapped inside that house, still at the mercy of people who viewed her as an expendable asset. Emma, sweetheart, we can see the news truck from here, Lulo said, keeping her voice steady. You're doing perfectly. Just stay exactly where you are. Grandma Lou, they're really angry. Daddy Richard is yelling at the men with guns, and they keep looking at my window. The confirmation sent ice through Lulo's veins. Richard knew Emma was communicating with them, but he couldn't stop it without creating an even bigger scene. The stalemate was fragile, balanced on the edge of violence that federal agents couldn't risk with cameras rolling. Dr. Chen was studying the house through binoculars, her medical training evident in how she analyzed the tactical situation. Ground floor, second window from the left. That's where she is. If this goes bad, if they try to move her, that's our target. Lucas finished his call with Mrs. Patterson and immediately dialed another number. Child Protective Services emergency line, he explained. The teacher got them to open an immediate investigation. They're sending someone now. But Lulo understood something the others didn't yet grasp. Richard wasn't just a corrupt stepfather. He was part of the system they were trying to invoke for protection. His Department of Health and Human Services commendation meant he had allies throughout the bureaucracy, people who could make inconvenient investigations disappear. It's not enough, she said quietly. Even with media attention, even with CPS involvement, he has too many connections, too much institutional protection. The realization should have been devastating, but instead, Lulo felt a strange calm settling over her. 3 years ago, Michael Torres had tried to work within the system, building cases and following procedures. His body had been found in the Columbia River, another suicide statistic that closed an uncomfortable investigation. But Michael had never had what they possessed now: a granddaughter whose innocence could cut through decades of institutional corruption. Emma wasn't just evidence, she was humanity itself, 8 years old and asking for help in the most basic way possible. "We're not going to wait for the system to save her," Lulo announced, surprising herself with the decisiveness in her voice. "We're going to save her ourselves." Dr. Chen lowered her binoculars. "Lulo, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Richard made a mistake. He's so focused on controlling the legal narrative that he's forgotten the human element. Emma isn't property to be transferred. She's a little girl who knows right from wrong." On the tablet screen, Emma was pointing towards something outside her window. Following her gesture, Lulo saw Sarah Martinez approaching the house with a cameraman in tow, her press credentials prominently displayed. The federal agents moved to intercept them, but their hesitation was obvious. Detaining journalists on camera would create exactly the kind of publicity nightmare their operation couldn't survive. "Emma," Lulo said urgently, "in about 30 seconds, a lady is going to knock on your front door. She's a friend, someone who helps children like you. When that happens, I need you to do something very brave." Emma's eyes widened, but she nodded. "I need you to open your bedroom door and shout as loud as you can that you want to go home with your grandparents. Can you do that? But the men with guns won't hurt you in front of the cameras. They can't. That's why the news people are here." Lucas was already moving toward the house, his phone recording everything. Dr. Chen followed, her medical bag visible as a symbol of legitimate authority. Together, they formed a wall of witnesses that made violence impossible. The final confrontation wasn't going to be fought in courtrooms or government offices. It would be decided here, in the growing daylight of a residential street, where ordinary people chose between institutional convenience and a child's desperate plea for help. Emma's stuffed elephant watched from the window like a purple sentinel, marking the exact spot where justice would either triumph or die forever. The knock came precisely when Lulo promised it would. Through the tablet screen, she watched Emma's face transform from fear to determination as Sarah Martinez's voice carried through the house, professional and unwavering, Channel 7 News. "We're here about reports of a child welfare emergency." Emma didn't hesitate. She threw open her bedroom door, and her 8-year-old voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "I want to go home with my grandparents. Please don't let them take me away." The words shattered the careful choreography Richard had constructed. Through the phone's speaker, Lulo heard adult voices erupting in angry confusion, Richard's smooth courtroom tone cracking under pressure, federal agents barking orders into radios, footsteps pounding on hardwood floors. But above it all, Emma's voice rose again. Stronger now. "Grandma Lou, I can see you. I'm here." Lucas reached the front door first, his phone held high as he documented everything. The federal agents positioned there faced an impossible choice: physically restrain an elderly man with cameras rolling, or allow him to demand access to his granddaughter. Their hesitation lasted exactly long enough for Dr. Chen to arrive, her medical credentials giving her words official weight. "I'm here to conduct a welfare check on Emma Sinclair," she announced loudly enough for Sarah's microphone to capture. "As a mandated reporter, I have reason to believe this child is being held against her will." Richard appeared in the doorway, his expensive suit immaculate, but his face flushed with barely controlled panic. For 3 years, he'd operated from shadows and legal technicalities. Being exposed to daylight was clearly not in his playbook. "This is a private family matter," he said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that had intimidated judges and social workers. But here, surrounded by cameras and witnesses, it sounded hollow. "These people have no legal standing." "We have grandparents' rights," Lucas interrupted, and Lulo felt proud of how steady he sounded. "And Emma has the right to voice her preferences about where she wants to live." Behind Richard, Emma appeared at the top of the staircase, still clutching her purple elephant. The sight of her granddaughter, alive, unharmed but clearly frightened, sent strength surging through Lulo's chest. Every decision they'd made, every risk they'd taken, had led to this moment. But Richard wasn't finished. He stepped aside, revealing two federal agents flanking the hallway, their presence designed to intimidate despite the cameras. Emma is scheduled for protective relocation due to credible threats against her safety. These threats originate from the very people now demanding access to her. The lie was expertly crafted, transforming their rescue attempt into apparent evidence of the danger Emma faced. In a courtroom with only lawyers and judges present, it might have been convincing. But here, with Emma's own voice contradicting every word, it revealed the desperation behind Richard's careful facade. Sarah Martinez pressed forward, her cameraman capturing every exchange. "Mr. Westbrook, can you explain why federal agents are needed to protect a child from her own grandparents? What specific threats have been made? That information is classified." "Emma's not classified," Lulo called out, finding her own voice at last. She stepped past the federal agents, past Richard's legal maneuvering, past 3 years of institutional intimidation. "Emma, sweetheart, do you want to come home with us?" "Yes." Emma's response was immediate and clear, echoing through the house and into Sarah's microphone. "I don't want to go away. I want to stay with Grandma and Grandpa." The simplicity of it cut through every legal complexity Richard had constructed. An 8-year-old girl asking to stay with grandparents who loved her. The federal agents looked uncertain now, their orders apparently not covering what to do when their operation became a public spectacle centered on a child's basic human desires. Dr. Chen seized the opening. "Emma, are you being prevented from leaving your room? Are there people here with weapons?" "The men have guns," Emma said, pointing toward the agents. "They said I couldn't leave, not even to get breakfast." Lulo watched Richard's carefully maintained composure finally crack. He grabbed for Emma, but Lucas stepped between them, his 68-year-old frame suddenly radiating protective fury. "Don't touch her," Lucas said quietly, but his words carried absolute conviction. "Not while we're here, not while people are watching." The standoff crystallized around that moment, federal agents unwilling to create a massacre on live television, Richard desperate to salvage his operation, and Emma caught in the middle, still holding her purple elephant like a talisman of the childhood innocence that made this entire conspiracy so monstrous. Sarah Martinez sensed the climactic tension. "Emma," she called gently, "what do you want to happen right now?" Emma looked down at all the adults arranged below her, the agents with their guns, Richard with his lies, her grandparents with their desperate love. When she spoke, her voice carried the clarity that only children possessed. "I want to go home," she said. "I want this to stop." Everything balanced on that moment, on what powerful people would choose when a child's simple request threatened their carefully constructed world. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Richard made his fatal mistake. "Emma, get back in your room right now," he snapped, his mask of paternal concern finally slipping completely. "You don't understand what's at stake here." But Emma didn't move. Instead, she descended one more step, then another, her purple elephant clutched against her chest like armor. "I understand that you're not my real daddy," she said with devastating 8-year-old honesty, "and I understand that you hurt other children." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. His face went white, then flushed crimson as he realized what Emma had just revealed on live television. Behind him, the federal agents exchanged glances that spoke of operations blown and careers destroyed. "She doesn't know what she's saying," Richard said desperately, but his voice cracked. "She's been manipulated, poisoned against me by the truth?" Lulo stepped forward, her research instincts finally crystallizing into perfect clarity. "The same truth that Michael Torres died trying to expose? The truth about what you've been doing to children in that facility?" Sarah Martinez's eyes sharpened like a predator sensing blood. Her cameraman zoomed in on Richard's face, capturing every micro-expression of guilt and panic. "What facility? Mr. Westbrook, are there allegations of child abuse?" "Shut it down," Richard barked to the agents. "Shut this down right now." But the lead agent, a woman in her 40s with gray-streaked hair, shook her head slowly. "Sir, with respect, that's not tactically feasible. Not with this level of media exposure." Richard spun toward her, his composure completely shattered. "Agent Morrison, I'm ordering you to implement Protocol 7, immediate extraction, all assets secured." "Protocol 7 involves eliminating witnesses," Agent Morrison said quietly. "Are you ordering me to murder civilians on live television?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Even the cameraman stopped breathing, understanding that they'd just documented something that would bring down governments. Lulo felt Lucas's hand find hers, their fingers interlocking with the strength of 43 years together. This was it, the moment when ordinary people faced the full weight of institutional evil and chose to stand firm anyway. "Emma," Lulo called softly, "come down here, sweetheart. Come to Grandma." Emma took another step, then another. With each movement, Richard's operation crumbled a little more. The federal agents made no move to stop her. They were government employees, not child kidnappers, and the distinction mattered when cameras were rolling. "You have no idea what you're destroying," Richard said, his voice now carrying genuine desperation. "The research we're conducting, the advances in pediatric medicine, the children we've helped." "The children you've experimented on," Dr. Chen corrected, her medical authority giving weight to the accusation. "Without consent, without oversight. Michael Torres documented everything before you had him killed." "Michael Torres killed himself!" Richard's shout echoed through the house, confirming what they'd only suspected. He was unstable, paranoid, couldn't handle the pressure of real scientific advancement. Sarah Martinez had her story now, and her questions came like surgical strikes. "How many children, Mr. Westbrook? How many facilities? How long has this been operating?" But Richard was beyond answering. His eyes had gone wild, calculating escape routes and damage control in real time. "You people have no comprehension of what's at stake here. The breakthroughs we've achieved, the potential to save thousands of lives, by destroying individual ones," Lucas said quietly. Starting with Emma. Emma had reached the bottom of the staircase now, only 10 feet from her grandparents but still separated by federal agents who looked increasingly uncomfortable with their role. Agent Morrison studied the child's face, then looked at Richard with something approaching disgust. "Sir," she said formally, "I'm requesting clarification of my orders. Am I here to protect a child or to facilitate her kidnapping?" "You're here to follow orders," Richard snapped. But his authority was evaporating in real time. Orders that come from levels of government these people can't even comprehend. "Then let them clarify those orders," Morrison replied. She pulled out her radio and spoke clearly into it. "Command, this is Morrison. Requesting immediate supervisor contact regarding Protocol 7 authorization. We have significant public exposure and need confirmation before proceeding." The radio crackled for several seconds before a tired voice responded. "Agent Morrison, you are ordered to stand down immediately. Withdraw from location. Repeat, stand down and withdraw." Richard's face went ashen. In the span of 30 minutes, he'd gone from untouchable government asset to public liability. The same bureaucracy that had protected him for years was now cutting him loose to save itself. Emma didn't wait for permission. She ran past the bewildered agents, past the reporters, straight into Lulo's arms. The impact nearly knocked them both down, but Lulo held tight, feeling her granddaughter's heartbeat against her chest like proof that love could triumph over institutions after all. "It's over," she whispered into Emma's hair. "It's finally over." But even as she spoke the words, Lulo knew the real fight was just beginning. The sirens arrived within minutes, but not the ones Lulo expected. Instead of Child Protective Services vehicles, black SUVs surrounded the house. More federal agents, these ones wearing tactical gear that made their intentions unmistakably clear. Agent Morrison's radio crackled again, and this time, the voice carried absolute authority. Previous order rescinded. Implement containment protocol immediately. No witnesses, no exceptions. Morrison stared at the radio in her hand, then at Emma still clutched in Lulo's arms, the cameras still rolling. Her face went through a series of calculations that ended in something like grief. I can't do this, she said quietly, removing her earpiece and letting it fall to the ground. 30 years of service, and I can't do this. But the new agents had no such hesitations. Their leader, a man with dead eyes and military bearing, surveyed the scene with professional detachment. Clear the area, media equipment to be confiscated, all civilians to be detained for national security debriefing. Sarah Martinez backed toward her news van, her cameraman still filming. This is a public street. You have no authority. The shot came from somewhere behind the tactical vehicles, a precise sniper-esque bullet that shattered the camera lens and sent everyone diving for cover. Except Lulo, who stood frozen in the open, Emma's body pressed against hers like a shield she would never let fall. "Grandma," Emma whispered. "I'm scared." Lulo's mind raced through impossible calculations. They had exposed the conspiracy, but exposure meant nothing if everyone who witnessed it disappeared. Richard was already being hustled toward one of the black SUVs, his usefulness expired but his knowledge still requiring permanent silence. That's when she understood what victory would truly cost. "Lucas," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "Take Emma and run." "What?" Lucas looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Lou, we're not separating. Not now." "Yes, we are." She gently transferred Emma into Lucas's arms, feeling her granddaughter's fingers reluctantly release their grip on her sweater. "You run and you don't look back. Get her to Mrs. Patterson's house. Get her somewhere safe. I'm not leaving you." "You're not leaving me," Lulo said, touching his face with infinite tenderness. "You're saving her. That's all that matters now." She could see understanding dawn in Lucas's eyes. The terrible mathematics of love that demanded impossible choices. One of them had to stay and face the consequences. One of them had to ensure Emma escaped. "Lou, 43 years, she whispered, pouring a lifetime of love into 3 words. "Remember the good parts." Before Lucas could protest further, Lulo stepped away from them and walked directly toward the tactical team leader. Every step took her further from her family and deeper into the machinery that destroyed people who knew too much. "You want someone to blame for this exposure?" she called out, her librarian's voice carrying surprising authority. "I'm Eleanor Sinclair. I found Michael Torres's evidence. I organized this confrontation. I'm the one you actually need." The team leader studied her with predator's eyes. "Ma'am, you need to step back." "No," Lulo said firmly. "I need to step forward, because while you're wasting time with an elderly woman who's already lived her life, a child and her grandfather are disappearing into a neighborhood where people will ask questions if they vanish." It was a gamble based on institutional psychology. The same bureaucratic thinking that had protected the conspiracy would also drive them to contain damage efficiently. One cooperative target was preferable to a messy public chase. Behind her, she heard Lucas's footsteps moving away, Emma's quiet crying fading into distance. The sound broke her heart and filled it simultaneously. Dr. Chen appeared at Lulo's side, her medical bag still clutched in white-knuckled hands. "If you're taking her, you're taking me too. Someone needs to document what happens next." Sarah Martinez stepped forward as well, her backup phone now recording where her camera had been destroyed. Channel 7 News doesn't abandon sources. One by one, the witnesses chose to stand with Lulo rather than flee. Mrs. Patterson emerged from her house across the street. Other neighbors appeared on porches, drawn by sirens and the instinct that something fundamentally wrong was happening on their block. The tactical leader spoke into his radio, his frustration evident. "Situation has escalated beyond containment parameters, requesting guidance on civilian exposure levels." Lulo smiled sadly, understanding that their sacrifice had already succeeded. The conspiracy could destroy individuals, but it couldn't murder an entire neighborhood on live television without creating exactly the kind of exposure that would bring down governments. "It's over, isn't it?" she said to the tactical leader. "Really over this time?" He didn't answer, but his radio did. "All units withdraw. Operation terminated. Repeat, all units withdraw immediately." As the black SUVs disappeared into the morning light, Lulo finally allowed herself to collapse, her body shaking with the delayed reaction of absolute terror and absolute triumph. They had won, but the cost was everything she had ever been except Emma's grandmother. The silence that followed the disappearing vehicles felt surreal, like the moment after a thunderstorm when the air still vibrates with electricity, but the danger has passed. Lulo remained on her knees where she'd collapsed, staring at the empty street as if the black SUVs might materialize again through sheer force of disbelief. Dr. Chen was the first to move, her medical training overriding the shock. She knelt beside Lulo, checking her pulse with practiced fingers. "Eleanor, can you hear me? Are you experiencing any chest pain or difficulty breathing?" Lulo managed a weak laugh that bordered on hysteria. "I'm fine. I'm alive, which is more than I expected 5 minutes ago." But even as she spoke, her hands trembled uncontrollably, the delayed reaction finally hitting her nervous system. Sarah Martinez lowered her backup phone, her face pale but determined. "Oh my God," she whispered. "We actually got it. All of it. The admissions, the threats, the cover-up orders, everything." Mrs. Patterson approached cautiously from across the street, her elderly frame moving with surprising urgency. "Eleanor? Dear, what just happened here? Those men with guns?" "It's over, Mrs. Patterson," Lulo said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. "The bad men are gone." Lucas appeared at the corner, Emma clutched in his arms, both of them running despite their exhaustion. When he saw Lulo still sitting in the street, alive and unmolested, his legs nearly gave out. Emma broke free and ran to her grandmother, tackling her with 8-year-old enthusiasm that knocked them both flat. "Grandma, you're okay. I thought they took you away like they were going to take me." Lulo wrapped her arms around Emma, feeling her granddaughter's solid warmth as proof that they had actually survived this nightmare. "Nobody's taking anybody anywhere," she murmured into Emma's hair. "We're staying together now, all of us." Lucas sank down beside them, his own hands shaking as badly as Lulo's. "Lou, when you walked toward those agents, I thought I was watching you die." "I thought so too," Lulo admitted, "but sometimes the only way forward is through." She looked around at the small group of witnesses who had chosen to stand with them, Dr. Chen with her medical bag, Sarah with her phone, Mrs. Patterson and several neighbors who had emerged from their homes when their street became a battleground. "We all thought so." Dr. Chen helped them stand, her professional demeanor softening into something more personal. "What you did, what all of you did, it saved more than just Emma. Those medical records we found, the evidence of experimentation. How many other children might have suffered if this had continued?" Sarah Martinez was already on her phone with her news station, her voice animated with the electricity of a breaking story. "Yes, federal agents. Yes, live footage of the withdrawal. I need a legal team standing by. This is going to bring down everyone involved." The reality of their victory was slowly settling in, but Lulo found it difficult to feel celebratory. Emma was safe, the conspiracy was exposed, but the cost had been enormous. Their old life, their quiet retirement, their financial security, their peaceful anonymity was gone forever. They were survivors now, not just of a conspiracy, but of the trauma of fighting institutional evil. "What happens now?" Emma asked, the question all of them were thinking. Lucas looked at their rundown apartment building, then at the news van, then at his wife's exhausted face. "Now we figure out how to live with what we know, how to help Emma heal from what she's been through, how to make sure this never happens to another child." Dr. Chen closed her medical bag with a decisive snap. "I'll be testifying about those medical records. What was done to those children? It violates every ethical principle of medicine. The families deserve to know the truth." "The story will run tonight," Sarah said, ending her call. "National pickup by morning. This won't disappear or get buried. Too many people know now." Lulo stood slowly, Emma's hand firmly clasped in hers, Lucas's arm around her shoulders. The morning sun felt different now. Not just the end of a terrible night, but the beginning of something undefined. They had won, but victory looked nothing like what she had imagined. "We should go inside," she said finally. "Emma needs breakfast, and we all need to process what just happened." The world's going to be very interested in us for a while." As they walked toward their apartment building, Lulo felt the weight of transformation. They were no longer the broken old couple who had bought a storage unit with their last $200. They were witnesses, survivors, protectors of truth. The change was irreversible and profound. Emma squeezed her hand. "Grandma, are we really safe now?" Lulo looked down at her granddaughter's trusting face and chose honesty over false comfort. "Safer than we were yesterday, sweetheart. And together. That's what matters most." Behind them, the street returned to its normal rhythm, but nothing would ever be quite the same. The return. 3 weeks later, Lulo stood in the doorway of what had once been her daughter Margaret's house, holding a leather satchel that contained the legal documents that had changed everything. The morning light filtered through windows that no longer belonged to Richard Westbrook, windows that would soon welcome Emma home for good. "It's strange being back here," Emma said softly, her small hand finding Lulo's. "It doesn't feel scary anymore." The house did look different somehow, though nothing had physically changed. The conspiracy's exposure had stripped away the veneer of respectability that had once made this place feel untouchable. Now was just a house where a little girl had lived and would live again. Lucas emerged from the kitchen, moving with a vitality that Lulo hadn't seen since before Margaret's death. The constant tension that had aged him decades in mere months was gone, replaced by something she recognized from their early years together: purposeful determination. "The last of Richard's things are gone," he reported, setting down a cardboard box. "His lawyers cleared everything out yesterday. Emma, your room is exactly as your mother left it." Emma released Lulo's hand and walked slowly toward the staircase, her footsteps echoing in the suddenly spacious house. She paused at the bottom step, looking up toward the second floor where she'd been raised, where she'd hidden from federal agents just weeks ago. "Can we change some things?" she asked quietly. "Not Mom's things, but maybe paint my room a different color, make it feel new?" "We can change anything you want, sweetheart," Lulo said, understanding that Emma needed to reclaim this space, to make it hers rather than something that had been done to her. "What color were you thinking?" "Yellow," Emma said immediately. "Like sunshine, like hope." Lulo felt tears threaten, recognizing Margaret's optimism in her daughter's words. The granddaughter carried forward the best parts of the mother they'd lost, but tempered now with a wisdom no 8-year-old should possess. The legal victory had been swift once the media attention made Richard's position untenable. His arrest on federal conspiracy charges had automatically voided his custody petition. And with Dr. Chen's testimony about Emma's psychological state, the court had expedited the grandparents' custody case. They were a family again, legally and permanently. But the emotional victory was more complex. Lucas joined Lulo in the doorway, watching Emma explore the house with careful, deliberate steps. "She's different," he observed quietly. "Stronger, but also more fragile. Does that make sense?" It made perfect sense. They were all different now, survivors of something that should never have happened, carriers of knowledge they wished they didn't possess. Lulo herself felt the change most acutely in quiet moments like this, when the crisis had passed but the transformation remained. "Mrs. Patterson called this morning," Lucas continued. "She wanted to know if we're keeping the apartment in Millbrook, as a backup plan." Lulo considered this. The rundown apartment had been their refuge, the place where they'd learned to fight impossible odds. Part of her wanted to maintain that connection, but another part recognized the need to move forward rather than backwards. "What did you tell her?" "That we'd think about it. But Lucas turned to face her fully. "I don't think we're the same people who needed that apartment anymore. We're not running from anything now." He was right, though the realization carried its own weight. The broken old couple who had scraped together $200 for a storage unit auction had ceased to exist somewhere in the chaos of the past month. In their place stood people who had faced institutional evil and chosen courage over safety, truth over comfort. Emma called from the living room, her voice carrying a note of discovery. "Grandma, Grandpa, come look at this!" They found her kneeling by the fireplace, where she'd discovered a small wooden box tucked behind the screen. Inside were Margaret's journals, hidden away during the custody battle, and photographs spanning Emma's entire life. "Mom wrote about you in here," Emma said, holding up one of the journals, "about how much she missed you, how sorry she was about the fighting with Richard. She wrote that if anything ever happened to her, she wanted me to live with you." Lulo sank into Margaret's favorite chair, overwhelmed by the evidence of her daughter's true wishes, all the legal maneuvering, all the accusations of inadequate care. Richard had known Margaret's feelings and hidden them anyway. "She loved you very much," Lucas said gently, sitting on the couch arm beside Emma. "All of us. She would be so proud of how brave you've been." Emma climbed onto Lulo's lap, the journal still clutched in her hands. "Are we going to be okay now? Really okay?" Lulo looked around the house that would be their home, at Lucas, whose strength had been tested and proven, at Emma, who carried Margaret's spirit into an uncertain but hopeful future. They were different people returning to a familiar place, but the difference felt like growth rather than loss. "We're going to be better than okay," she said, meaning it completely. "We're going to be a family." Outside, the world continued to reckon with the conspiracy they had exposed, but inside this house, 3 generations of love were finally truly safe. Chapter 18, The New Beginning. 6 months had passed since that desperate morning when everything changed, and Lulo barely recognized the woman who looked back at her from Margaret's bedroom mirror. The frightened, broken person who had bid on a storage unit with her last $200 was gone. In her place stood someone who had testified before Congress, whose library research skills had helped unravel a decades-long conspiracy, whose granddaughter painted sunshine yellow walls with confident strokes. "Grandma, are you coming?" Emma's voice carried down the hallway, bright with the particular excitement of a 9-year-old who had learned that safety was real, not just promised. "In a minute, sweetheart," Lulo called back, smoothing the quilt on the bed she now shared with Lucas in the room where Margaret had once dreamed her own dreams. They had kept some of their daughter's things, the jewelry box with the dancing ballerina, the bookshelf filled with poetry collections, but made the space their own. It was healing to sleep where love had once flourished, where it flourished again. Through the window, she could see Lucas in the backyard garden he'd started in spring. Emma crouched beside him as they examined the tomato plants. He moved differently now, not with the defeated shuffle of a man who'd lost everything, but with the purposeful energy of someone who had found his strength when it mattered most. The conspiracy trials had required his testimony too, his quiet courage in facing down federal agents becoming part of the public record. They had become inadvertent celebrities, the grandparents who exposed the underground. Sarah Martinez had won a Pulitzer for her investigative series. Dr. Chen now ran a foundation dedicated to supporting families affected by illegal medical experimentation. Mrs. Patterson gave interviews about the courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary evil. But here, in this house that love had reclaimed, they were simply a family learning to trust in permanence again. The phone rang. It did that frequently now, reporters and documentary filmmakers and legal advocates seeking their input. Lulo let it go to voicemail. After months of public testimony and media attention, she had learned the importance of protecting their private moments. She found Emma and Lucas in the kitchen, flour dusting the counters as they attempted what appeared to be cookies. Emma's face was streaked with chocolate, her concentration absolute as she measured vanilla extract with scientific precision. "We're making Margaret's recipe," Lucas explained, consulting a handwritten index card. Emma found it in her mother's recipe box. "Mom used to let me lick the spoon," Emma said, holding up the mixing bowl hopefully. "She said the raw cookie dough was the best part." Lulo's heart squeezed with the familiar ache of missing Margaret, but it was different now, softer, less desperate. Grief would always be part of their family's story, but it no longer defined them. They were creating new memories in the spaces where old ones lived. "Your mother was absolutely right about that," Lulo said, taking the offered spoon. The cookie dough tasted exactly as she remembered from visits before the custody battle, before everything went wrong. Some things, it turned out, remained untouched by even the worst trauma. Emma settled into her lap as they waited for the cookies to bake, a ritual that had become precious in its ordinariness. No longer did they start at unexpected sounds or worry about surveillance. The conspiracy's key figures were imprisoned, the illegal facilities shut down, the children who had survived finally receiving proper care. "Mrs. Patterson called," Emma announced. "She wants to know if we're coming to her block party next weekend." "What did you tell her?" Lucas asked, settling beside them at the kitchen table that had witnessed so many family meals before grief divided them. "I told her yes, of course. We're neighbors. That's what neighbors do." Such a simple statement, but it represented everything they had fought to preserve: the right to live normal lives, to be part of a community, to raise a child without fear. Emma's understanding of belonging had been hard-won, but it was absolute now. The timer chimed, filling the kitchen with the smell of home. As Lucas pulled the cookies from the oven, and Emma chattered about her plans for the summer reading program at the library where Lulo now volunteered, a profound peace settled over them. They had survived the unthinkable and chosen love over fear, truth over safety. "Are you happy here?" Lulo asked Emma, as they cooled the cookies on Margaret's old wire racks. Emma considered the question with the seriousness she brought to everything now, her experiences having aged her in some ways while preserving her essential optimism in others. "I'm home," she said simply, "with you and Grandpa, in Mom's house, making her cookies. I think this is what happy means." Lulo looked around the kitchen where 3 generations of women had baked and dreamed and loved, where a little girl who had faced unimaginable dangers now planned block parties and summer reading. The storage unit that had started their journey was long empty, its secrets transformed into justice. What remained was what had always mattered most: family found and fought for, and finally, blessedly safe. Outside, the world continued its complicated dance of justice and healing. Inside, Eleanor Sinclair, Lulo to those who loved her, held her granddaughter close, and knew that some victories, once won, could never be taken away.